the business plan is actually the enemy of innovation and the enemy of entrepreneurship. Because what business plans are good for is to plan and execute. So they're not per se bad. They're just a disaster in innovation and they're a disaster in entrepreneurship.
This episode is brought to you by WHU, the Otto Beisheim School of Management. WHU is reshaping the way students learn about business, management, finance, and entrepreneurship through its innovative programs and partnerships in Germany and across the globe. To learn more about this globally ranked university, visit whu.edu today.
Hey folks, Gerrit here. In this latest episode of the Most Awesome Founder podcast, I am once again joined by my favorite partner in crime, Professor Dries Faems, to welcome a guest whose work I've been a fan of for many years. Alex Osterwalder is a Swiss-born entrepreneur, founder of Strategyzer, visiting professor at IMB Business School, author, public speaker, and one of the big brains behind the famed business model canvas, who I'm sure of many of you are likely familiar with.
Coming to you from WHU on the banks of the Rhine River in beautiful Vallendar, Germany. This is the best and most awesome founder podcast. A show about entrepreneurs, innovators, advisors, and educators, and the stories that make them who they are today.
Alex, welcome. Great to have you here finally.
Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
So we like to start our episodes off the same way with all of our guests, with a little bout of storytelling. Some people start at their childhood. Some people start a few years ago. Completely up to you where you want to begin, but maybe you could kick things off by kind of telling us where you come from and how you ended up where you are today.
So I am born in Switzerland, in the Swiss-German part. I actually now live in the French-speaking part. And just very quick background, I'm married and have 2 children. Now, to go back to where I landed today professionally, I just always liked creating stuff, and I was always into visual. Like I used to like to draw and all of that. I like computers when they, I'm gonna date myself if I talk about the first visual IBM computers and stuff. I had one in my room. My father was a manager. He got a computer. He didn't know what to do with it, so he put it in the room of his son, right? So that kind of is mixes things together. How did I end up thinking business models? It actually comes from that kind of in the early days. So then make a big jump, because I'm not going to talk about the whole boring part in between. Big jump to, I worked with Yves Pigneur, professor at the University of Lausanne, business information systems. He was working on business models. He was looking for a PhD student. Well, I showed up because he was my favorite professor. And his idea was like, we could probably make a computer-aided design tool for business. Just like architects, they make, they have this visual tool to come up with buildings. Why can't we do that for business? And not processes, right? So process management was already a thing there, but for business models, like the core business logic. So the question was, well, how do you do that? You first need some kind of model to come up with that. So I did my PhD with Yves, and we became great friends, worked together now for over 2 decades. And that then took off. So people started downloading my PhD. Like, who does that? PhDs are written to get a title, not necessarily to be read. I didn't know that. So that's how the whole thing started. And the business model canvas literally came out of my PhD. It's, kind of the top layer that when later on I was, building a consulting firm with a friend, Stefano Mastrogiacomo. We put that on the wall, started filling it out and said, hey, this is a tool. So I knew the concept worked, but I didn't know it was a business tool. So that's how the whole thing started. And from there, I continued to work on visual business tools, visual strategic business tools, but also then embedding that into computer technology. So today with Strategyzer, we build kind of a system, the innovation infrastructure, so people can do this not just on paper with sticky notes or in visual whiteboarding tools, but have a real computer-aided design system to innovate.
Amazing.
Yeah, and I think today we actually want to talk with you about this kind of tools. And actually, in my teaching at WHU, I heavily rely on your insights with respect to hypothesis development and hypothesis testing, because you had a great video about that on your Strategyzer website. So I would like to take the opportunity today to dig a bit deeper into kind of the concepts and the tools that you have around that topic. But maybe before we delve into the kind of hardcore stuff, can you maybe explain for our audience what you mean with the word hypothesis in the context of a startup? What does that mean?
Yeah, so look, when you have an idea, you think the idea is everything, but actually, you know what? I'm actually going to draw this. So let me kind of have some fun drawing stuff, right? And what do I mean with hypothesis? So let's say you're a founder, you start with this idea, which could be a technology, market opportunity. The way is to start, right? And your goal is to kind of build a real business, right? And you need to go from here to here. So traditionally, what did we teach in business schools and even on engineering schools? We taught how to write a business plan, and then you had this curve going up like this, right?
Yeah.
And the reality is, the business plan is actually the enemy of innovation and the enemy of entrepreneurship, because what business plans are good for is to plan and execute. So they're not per se bad. They're just a disaster in innovation, and they're a disaster in entrepreneurship. So the journey in entrepreneurship and innovation is more like this, right? You advance, you regress, and then if you make it over here, and a lot of ideas rest in peace, right?
Yeah.
Well, how do you manage that? Definitely not with a business plan, because you're not going to invest in a spreadsheet and in a beautiful PowerPoint deck. That is less and less the case. So what do people do today? Because you do need to replace that, right? You can't just say, oh, here's some money, go and do stuff. So what do we replace that with? Very simple. We draw out our idea in a business model canvas. So we take this, shape it, we make maybe a value proposition canvas, and this should take maximum, probably like 2 to 3 hours. It could be even faster. So you don't spend a lot of time on making a business plan. You roughly sketch out your business design, your idea for how you're going to create value for customers and your business model in the shortest amount possible. Because here's the thing, you need to accept as an entrepreneur, you're very likely to be wrong. Now, here's where we're going to get to hypothesis. So when you have an idea, you actually need to admit that uncertainty and risk, that your idea is something silly, that's not going to work how you imagined it. You need to just admit that you're probably wrong. You could be very wrong if you're doing something substantially, different, and you could be pretty wrong if you're kind of doing a better, mousetrap or so. So your task as an entrepreneur and innovator is very simple. You only have one task. It's not to dole out business cards. It's not to raise money. We always think entrepreneurs, they raise money. Well, maybe, and eventually, probably, but that's not your main task. Your main task is to make sure you're not going to build something nobody wants. That's your main task. So what do? You de-risk. You de-risk by experimenting. And, Steve Blank and Eric Ries, kicked this off, this whole movement from Silicon Valley. And Eric Ries called it lean startup and said, well, you need to build, measure, learn. But he didn't actually literally mean build, measure, learn. He even has an article out there from the old days where he says, well, before you build, you need to ask, what do you need to learn? So the number one question that you need to have as an entrepreneur, so you need to de-risk, right? You need to reduce the risk so you don't build something nobody wants. So the number one question is what do we need to learn before we build any experiment? And generally, it's not a physical thing that you build, not even a digital thing. So that means you shaped your idea, and now you ask, what do I need to learn? What needs to be true for this idea to work? So you're going to come up with all these hypotheses around this business idea. Oh, customers need to have that challenge. They need to be willing to pay, $12 for the subscription. Everything that needs to be true for your idea to work is a hypothesis. So that's what you're going to test. And you can't test all the hypotheses. So you're going to ask, what's the most important hypothesis to test? What's the biggest risk? And it's rarely, can I build it? It's generally, should I build it, which goes towards desirability. Do customers have that problem? Do they have that objective? And then viability very quickly. So hypothesis is the first thing you do to formulate what you need to learn. And since hypothesis is a bit of a complicated and maybe academic word, just frame it like this. What do I need to learn to test before I experiment? What do I need to learn? I need to learn that customers have this challenge. How could I test this? Well, let me talk to 20 and see if they have this challenge. Okay, now I know that they have this challenge. Well, what's the next thing I could do? So hypothesis simply is a tool to structure what you need to learn. And
I think you already said, you already said something very important, namely, in your opinion, at least, the most important thing is to test hypotheses related to desirability, and maybe technological feasibility is not really the priority in testing. Can you maybe explain a bit more why that is the case? Because I experience with my students that they feel that that's counterintuitive. They always would think like, oh, we first need to test that it works, and then we can do the other things.
100%. And that's your students. I can tell you, I work with executives. Of course they first, well, I can't, if it doesn't work, I can't put it out there. Well, that's the point. You don't even want to, try to figure out if it works, because any time spent on something that nobody cares about is useless. So when you look at this, right, you start with maximum risk. So your goal is actually to figure out if you should even continue with this project. So as fast as possible, you're going to go towards either killing this project or continuing. So when risk is high, you need to go with the fastest experiment and the cheapest experiment to learn if you should even continue another day or another week. And building something is the most expensive experiment. So even if we call it, minimum viable product, right? The key word that people always use, you never start with the minimum viable product, because building something is already a risk, because you're going to spend, at 5 days a week or so. If you can't build it in 5 minutes, ask first, should you build it? So you always start with the fastest and cheapest experiments. And the fastest, cheapest experiments to figure out if customers have that challenge. Because if they don't spend another minute on that idea. Either shift the idea, the customer segment. So with building, you're not going to learn that. So that's why people, when they say, oh, we do MVPs, and they say, that's the first thing we do. I say, well, then you really didn't understand what customer development and lean startup is about. No. So you need to ask, what's the most important thing I need to learn? And is rarely, can I build it? Because by part, how you prioritize, you ask, if that's not true, everything else doesn't matter. No. So if you can't build it, customers might still have that problem, right? So you might build it in a different way, but that's too expensive. So don't waste your time on expensive stuff before you have evidence that you should do that. Don't even try. And that's what people misunderstand a lot. Obviously, engineering students, they want to build stuff. Scientists, they want to, create a new molecule or something. That's the most expensive thing. And even if you do kind of orient your building and your scientific research, I work a lot with pharma, it's always better when it's informed by real customer evidence. So before you build anything, show me the customer based on evidence.
I want to get a little deeper into this topic, because I think it's one that a lot of nascent entrepreneurs and experienced entrepreneurs have struggles with. I always think of the lean startup, very much like the scientific method, right? Except the primary difference between the laws of physics or the laws of chemistry and human behavior and human reaction are profoundly different. So when you're testing a hypothesis with people, there's a lot murkier space to understand if you're getting a valid test. Like what do you tell people? What signals to look for to confirm or invalidate a hypothesis, and how deep do you need to go?
Yeah, I think there's this myth that when you test, all of a sudden the lights are going to go on and you'll see the truth. Like, unfortunately, that's not how entrepreneurship works. You'll also always have contradicting data, right? You'll have some customers, they'll say this, other customers will say that. So the goal is to detect patterns in the data. And here's the key thing, the most important thing that a lot of people get wrong. There's not one experiment that's going to show you the truth. The best teams and entrepreneurs, they run 10, 20 different experiments. And by the massive evidence that they're looking at, they're actually, starting to see that evidence. And of course, it's not about, you can get lost in experimentation. You gradually learn more. So if you first focus on customer jobs, pains, and gains, you're going to do 3, 4, 5 experiments around customers. Do interviews, you can do surveys, you can do landing pages, very quick stuff. And then all of a sudden, in that massive data, you're going to see things emerge, right? That's the key that to the secret here is you don't think that one experiment is going to give you the light. It's running several experiments that's going to give you patterns. And if you start with light, we actually have a way to really rigorously measure risk and uncertainty. The first evidence, lightest evidence, is people tell you, yeah, I have that problem. I like that idea. That's very light. They told you so, but telling me doesn't mean they're going to behave like that. So stronger evidence is if you get them to do something, so-called call to actions. So that's, signing up with an email, very light call to action. Didn't cost them a lot, but they won't do it if they don't care. But now if you get them to make a down payment, like Tesla did, with their very first kind of Tesla Roadster and then with the Model 3, that's real evidence. They made a down payment. You don't put money down on the table when you don't care. So with the massive different types of evidence and strong evidence, you're going to get more and more confident. So rather than seeing it like scientific, it's true or false. That's why I'd never use the word validated, or I tried not to use it, because it's wrong. You can say this supports my assumptions and hypothesis, or it doesn't support. But then it's different sources of evidence, different experiments that will give me that pattern. And it's really more about evidence-based decisions, that inform you. There's always this mix between, Steve Blank calls it, the art and science of entrepreneurship. It's not scientific because there's no absolute truth. It's not art because you are actually trying to figure out some patterns. So it's this navigation between the creative part and the more scientific part. And that's what's hard, is pure scientists will get lost, pure kind of dreamers and creatives will get lost. It's the ability to combine this art and science and seeing those patterns from your experiments.
Awesome. I want to go one step deeper on this. I built an enterprise SaaS company, and certain customers are harder to engage than others, right? You're not going to get to the C-suite of a Fortune 50 company without something in hand. So I felt in that particular venture, I was dealing with a lot more assumptions than I was if I was building a consumer-facing app. What is your advice for people that may not have access to the same data points that they would ideally want to have?
I'd say get creative, right? That's the kind of what really good entrepreneurs and successful entrepreneurs are good at, is they're creative in how they get access. Like, it's never going to be served to you on a platter. People tell me, yeah, but Alex, it's easy for you to generate traffic. Well, guess what? I didn't start with, so many people. I started with 0. Guess what? I got creative. So if we're talking about access to CEOs, well, figure out a way to get in the room. But before you get into the room to speak to them, make sure you did your homework. Talk to people who work with the CEO. That is a proxy, is generally a very good way to understand, those harder targets. Sometimes it's even better because you'll get the truth and not what the person tells you, right? Talk to the assistant of the CEO. They will take the time. Now, talking to the CEO, maybe not. And then once you understand, you can almost sometimes formulate as an experiment. Let me figure out, by talking to 10 personal assistants of CEOs, where is the gate, the gate, and how can I get in? So even there, you be creative and you're going to test how to get access. That's what entrepreneurs do. Entrepreneurs, they see opportunities, not challenges, and they will be kicked in the face 100 times. You know how many times you get slammed in the face when you want to talk to a CEO? That's okay. That's part of the job. So be creative and find different paths. So even accessing that customer requires experimentation. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
Maybe can I briefly follow up, because I think this is one of the biggest comments I get when I teach this kind of tools to my students, both MBA, bachelor, master students. They always tell me, yeah, what you propose at doing these kind of quick experiments, trying to get quick feedback from customers, that might work in a B2C environment, but in a B2B environment, it's impossible. That's what I'm always getting. And then it's always like, yeah, how should we do this in a B2B environment?
So I actually violently disagree. It's already kind of hard to generalize, right? So in some B2C arenas, it's hard, and some it's easy. And the same in B2B. Like if you're working with the Defense Department, of course it's going to be hard, right? But so you kind of need to, you can't generalize. But if you take B2B, in the traditional sense, big accounts, you have few people, you have a buying committee. I actually almost think it's easier because enterprises can be, again, depends a bit on the topic you're working on, can be more homogeneous than B2C out there. So I'd be careful to say B2C is easier. B2C, it's easier maybe to get access to a couple of people. But, if you're in the mass market, you talk to 10, well, maybe you talk to exactly the 10 that are not representative. So I personally, I am in B2B, so this is not an opinion. I think it's easier to get access and to learn. And B2B, you're generally really focusing on a functional job. Functional jobs, people know exactly what they want. Here's what I need. Here's what I'm struggling with. Here's the quality. That's an easier interview than when you're trying to, create. Imagine when Steve Jobs and the team was creating the iPod. Like that's so much harder. Was it pure just kind of, genius? No, they are very good at understanding customers. Understanding customers for mass market is much harder. Can you get access to people? Yes. But then from there to, million customers, I work with clients who tell me, okay, the yardstick is this idea needs to be, for at least 1 billion people. Okay, that's going to be hard to test, right? So I think there's this myth that B2C is easier. I'm not sure, right? So access, yes, but is that going to be representative? So I'm a big fan of B2B because you get, you know what you're working with and you know how to access these people.
In the end, you may have less data points, but you're having higher resolution, higher quality data with a smaller sample size. Yeah.
Love the framing you got there. Absolutely. It's exactly that. You should actually give the answers because you're synthesizing it so well.
I felt the pain of that problem myself, so I learned it through bumps and bruises.
Yeah, maybe another thing.
Haven't we all? But by the way, I think that's the key thing also when we're talking about education. Entrepreneurship education is like going to medical school. You have business anatomy and physiology. That's about, books behind me plus, Steve Blank, Eric Ries. You need to learn the theory. You can't do without, but at the same time, you don't become a doctor or a surgeon, an entrepreneurship surgeon by just reading books, right? So there's so much of that learning. And then if you look at the data, the average age of the successful scalable entrepreneurs is 43. There's this myth, it's the, Stanford dropout. Guess what? That's the rare exception. It's the most successful scale entrepreneurs. I'm not talking small business here. Those who scale companies, it's 43 years. Why is that? It's experience. There's some more data sets that show that first-time entrepreneurs, the probability is obviously smaller. So it's not the genius that brings people to kind of learn. This is exactly what you said. The bumps and bruises make you better. And the exciting thing is today, we have the tools and the methodology to support not pure kind of learning and figuring it out. We have both. You need the business anatomy and physiology, and you need to kind of roll up your sleeves and get those bumps and bruises. It's this combination that will turn you into a world-class entrepreneur.
Well, I think it's like what you said, it's the pattern recognition, right? The first times you're doing this, you're not seeing those patterns unfold. It's just like a software engineer. A senior software engineer can perform at multitudes of speed of a junior because they've tackled those problems before, and I think that's why we see successful entrepreneurs or for scale companies are generally older. They've identified the patterns earlier and can respond to them. So in the end, I think the method still, is still relevant.
And here's an interesting one. So first-time entrepreneurs who are young, they act often, and I don't have the data set on this, so this is like anecdotal, right? But they often fail with their second venture because they don't have that, longer term pattern recognition skill. So they're actually going to believe the patterns they got from one success. So it's extremely dangerous to be successful, because remember that drawing I made? All of a sudden you're going to think, well, I know how the world works. There is no risk and uncertainty. I've done this before. I had $1 billion exit. I don't need to go back and test. This is super dangerous, right?
Yeah.
So it can be when you're successful the first time that you don't realize you just got lucky. And then the second time, you might want to go back to, how it works for everybody else.
Yeah, great. Yeah, sorry, go ahead, Dries.
Because you were briefly mentioning before that you also do a lot of support for more established corporate organizations. And I also see that they more and more get interested in this kind of methodologies and tools. But at the same time, that exactly on the point of doing experiments, they often feel very uncomfortable. And I always like to do in my executive teaching, I just ask a question, how much should an experiment cost? and then these people say numbers like, 10,000 euros, and it should take 3 months. And then I'm like, no, that's way too much. That's way too long. But apparently that's the mindset they seem to have. What are your experiences in that respect?
Well, you're spot on. I'll push it a step further. The first thing they're going to ask is, which agency are we going to hire to do that work?
Indeed.
I mean, imagine an entrepreneur telling the VC, okay, thanks for the budget. I'm now going to hire an agency to run the experiments. Oh, and by the way, it costs $100,000. Like, you're never going to find an investor ever again. So it's spot on what you're saying. And I actually want to kind of just quickly share this. So here's the challenge in enterprise. So in a company that's running, that found its business model beyond startup, you actually have two worlds. You have exploit, running the business, and then you have explore, reinventing. And uncertainty is very different. On the right-hand side, when you run a business, you know the customer, you know the value proposition, you know the supply chain, things are predictable. So you can actually plan, and we'll see what that means then for investments. On the left-hand side, the drawing before, we don't know if it's going to work, and we actually need to admit. And in most corporations, you can't admit that this is a great idea, but I have no clue if it's going to work. Because there's this myth in corporations still that you can pick ideas. Nobody in the startup world or in the VC community would think they're smart enough to pick ideas. That's why VCs invest in portfolios, because they're not a humble breed, right? But they admit they can't pick just the winner. So now, that means in terms of investments, now we're spot on to what you said. On the right-hand side, we can make large bets, because when you can kind of predict the world, like know the customers, build a new factory, going to churn out, 20,000 more widgets, you analyze and make bets. Analysis and investment is important because you don't want to be wrong. But on the left-hand side, you have to admit you're going to be wrong. So you make very small bets and you make many of them. So overall, you might still invest 100K, but you're now going to invest in 10 teams or 20 teams. So the distribution changes. So you don't have a return on investment of a project. You're now thinking return on portfolio. So that's the difference, right? As an entrepreneur, data point of one, here you have projects with corporate entrepreneurs. Now let's look at the last one here. When it comes to questions to ask as a leader, well, on the right-hand side, it's going to be, are we on time, on budget? Are we sticking to the business plan? Business plans are an execution document. Now, unfortunately, companies still ask for business cases and business plans. Now, in innovation, the business plan is actually the enemy. So you need to ask a different question. What did you learn? Should we continue to invest, or should we kill the project or retire the project? So everything changes. So that little, anecdote that you mentioned about big budgets to do the first experiment, that shows that most leaders today, they're still kind of applying exploit KPIs and metrics and ways of working to the explore world. That can't be. So now the best corporate leaders, they understand these are two different worlds that need to live in harmony. And I actually believe innovation is the same profession as entrepreneurship, with some differences. It's just like one is a knee surgeon and one is a heart surgeon, right? So you can decide which one is which, but it's the same profession. Now, in a corporation, you have also the profession of running a company. That's the main difference. And for the entrepreneurs in a company, you're now doing this within an ecosystem. So benefit is you have access to money, you have access to brand, you have access to patents, you have access to customers, ideally, right? Ideally. But here's the downside, maybe you're blocked from all of that. So there are a lot of blockers. So it's the same profession, but within a different context. And that's what we're trying to do with Strategyzer. We're trying to bring the entrepreneurial mindset into the biggest companies of the world, like MasterCard, Nestle, and so on. We're trying to infuse that so the entrepreneurial spirit can live alongside the execution spirit.
I'm really interested in asking you a question that I think occurs both in the corporate entrepreneurial world and in the entrepreneurial world. And, you know, I'll steal a quote from the late, great Kenny Rogers of know when to hold them, know when to fold them, know when to walk away, know when to run, right? I mean, especially for entrepreneurs out in the wild, there's so much tied into your venture. There's emotion, there's ego, there's, you know, fear of failure, there's social pressures. And, you know, you're getting these data points and you're looking for patterns, but we all have a habit of holding on for dear life, right? How would you advise people to address this situation of when to fold them? And do you often see founders, entrepreneurs that are really trying to hypothesis test, keep looking for more hypotheses rather than closing the doors?
So I think there's this myth that you can pivot yourself to success. So in some cases, yes, again, it's art and science, and you need to have a vision as an entrepreneur, and you need to stick to that vision. This the steps that are changing. But frankly, if there's no evidence that you can ever produce, you probably at one point want to say, well, is this worth my time and energy? Because there is nothing there. And it could be a timing issue, right? So when people tell me, oh, I had that idea. Well, number one, like everybody has a lot of ideas and ideas are easy. And sometimes it is the timing. So the art is also to say, hey, I tried this actually 5 years ago. I stopped it because I learned there's nothing there today for this and this reason. I was wrong on the timing. 5 years later, you're going to succeed, right? So it's not because an idea didn't work then, it's not going to work tomorrow. So there's all these factors. But I think this myth, if I just pivot and pivot and pivot, I'm going to succeed, is really, really dangerous because it's not true. Sometimes you need to stop. Even, and this is really where great entrepreneurs, they will admit that and they will pay back investors. So even funded companies sometimes just say, no, we're calling it a day. We're going to pay back the remaining money to investors. And that's okay. That's okay. And then you work on the next thing, because here is the point of view of investors, venture capital. They know things are going to fail. And Steve Blank is a wonderful story where he was on the cover of a magazine the day, you know, the company went bust. Well, guess what? The same investors invested in Steve Blank again and had a multi-billion-dollar exit. Well, why is that? Because investors understand that it's not because you didn't succeed once, you're not going to succeed in another case. Back to the data, this is super important. There's this book on super founders, that data shows that second or third time entrepreneurs are more successful even when they failed. So there's this myth that you're going to have the big success after, you know, a small success. That's not even true. The data shows that some of the big successes, they were after smaller failures. So it's more like the duration of how many times somebody tried that brings you to success. So it's extremely important that we teach entrepreneurs and innovators that it's okay to fail. And when there's nothing there, is not giving up. It's being smart about where you're putting your time, energy, and your investors' money. This is completely underestimated, and we don't talk about it enough. This is extremely important.
I wanted to jump in on this one because as an American living in Germany and having built companies on both sides of the pond, I've felt different environments of, the way people perceive failure. And to me, that is almost a precursor, I think Tim Ferriss talks a lot about acceptable losses. Sarah Sarasvati talks a lot about affordable loss principle as well, really understanding that failure is baked into this journey. What's your experience and how to prepare founders, to have that right mindset so they know that they should respond to the signals accordingly rather than being mired in these social and emotional, constraints?
And I think the first thing we actually need to teach innovators and entrepreneurs is your job is to be humiliated 100 times a day, right. Every week, but you get up until you figured it out. And if, you're humiliated for a very long time, it's not about giving up. It's about saying, well, frankly, there's nothing there. I'm going to change my focus, my vision. So simply, getting them to learn that, to do that, showing cases, a lot of founders today are very transparent that they didn't succeed the first time. And they talk about this, that as long as you're not doing something criminal, we take Theranos, that's a different thing. That was criminal. But as long as you just really followed a process, you were not wasting money, but you were testing the idea and there was nothing there, you will actually, and this is the key thing to teach, you will actually gain the confidence from investors. Because if there's one thing investors don't want is to invest in teams that have never done it before. So again, back to this kind of young Stanford dropouts. Well, you know what? They're unreliable because they're going to make mistakes that somebody who's a second or third time entrepreneur, even unsuccessful, is not going to make. So why did, Steve Blank's investor invest in Steve again? Because he did lose dozens of millions, and they're saying, well, you never do that again. And to your point about America, I would actually be more narrow. I think corporate America is just as risk averse as German or Swiss corporations.
Sure.
If you take, and again, I'm not, there's good things about Silicon Valley, there's a whole debate right now, but and here I'm really leaning on my friend Steve again, there's one thing that they call a failed entrepreneur in Silicon Valley. And actually that is now also for Berlin, that is also for London, for Barcelona, for any startup ecosystem. This is how you call a failed entrepreneur. Do you know how you call a failed entrepreneur? Experienced.
Yeah.
So you're never going to do that again. And I can guarantee you, I made mistakes that cost me a ton of money. We're talking in the millions. Well, guess what? I'm never going to make that mistake again. And that was not investor money. That was my money, right? So you're not going to make that mistake. That experience is what you're going to give to investors. They know this founder or this founding team is not going to burn my money because they made those expensive, mistakes. Maybe on my wallet, as an investor, probably on somebody else's wallet. So we need to teach this because there are these myths still today, in particular for young entrepreneurs, that are not visible out there. And the press is not helping, right? The press continues, we had 30 under 30, now it's going to be like the 12 under 12.
And maybe to touch upon experience and your experience, because at the beginning you were talking about how you actually started in Switzerland in information systems. And I think, of course, today, and you might agree or disagree with that, there is quite an exciting time with this generative AI popping up. And then if I think about the tools for developing and testing hypotheses, do you see opportunities in terms of generative AI that can help us to kind of leverage or even speed up this process?
Oh, you bet. So we played around, our team played around with this. And today I had a conversation with an innovation leader in a corporation specifically around this. So what's going to happen? I did my team worked on it, and then I thought, wow, and I did a simple experiment. I actually asked, how are pharmaceutical companies, ChatGPT, right? How are pharmaceutical companies going to avoid obsolescence? What business models do they need to explore? Bam, 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 right? So it comes up, and like there's nothing surprising there when you have worked with pharmaceutical companies. But here's the thing, that was generated within 1 to 2 seconds. So what's going to happen, because I didn't stop there, and then I asked, okay, how am I going to test these business models? Bam, 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 2 seconds, right? So what's going to happen is the first, whatever, like 20 to 60% of the work is going to be done by ChatGPT, any other kind of similar tool. And then you need experts who can work with that because it's a foundation. A lot of it is going to be the obvious stuff, but the obvious stuff is going to go away. So what does this mean for white collar professions? The mediocre work where people just do the basics, that's going to go away. That's gone. There's no more money to be earned there. Now, the specialists who know how to work with this stuff that comes up that sounds extremely eloquent, but also has mistakes in it, now you have a foundation. So I'm just going to save, as an innovator entrepreneur, I'm going to save a ton of time. So the very basic work will be done for me by systems, but I have to be really good to be able to work with that stuff. So I think this is huge, and I can understand it from my world, but this is going to be for any kind of mediocre white collar thing. It's going to happen in banking, it's going to happen everywhere. So it's kind of scary because we're going to have an ultra specialization, a small group of people who are going to be paid insane amounts of money, and the middle group is going to go away. So this kind of gap is going to get bigger, and we're going to see the ultra specialized who know how to deal with this stuff. It's crazy times. I was blown away. I was skeptical until I used it myself, and then pop. And we're looking at how to build this into the Strategyzer tools because there's no way around it. There's no way around it.
Yeah, just as an anecdote, I had recently a course on developing novel business models. And normally in the course, it's always difficult for students to do customer interviews because it's time consuming and then the meeting needs out. And now I said to them, okay, just use ChatGPT as your customer. Do customer interviews with ChatGPT. And it was amazing the amount of insights they were able to generate from these interviews because ChatGPT was really acting like a regular customer, pointing to pain points, talking about how it solved problems before, why it was not working. So you could actually perfectly simulate a traditional customer interview using ChatGPT, which was really amazing.
And that's interesting, right? Because what do you do with these kinds of tools? You take a lot of data out there, and you can only work on things that are there, right? So like generative AI is not going to work for stuff where there's no data, right? So it's only because people already worked on pharmaceutical business models that ChatGPT could generate that list for me. But what I do think is also interesting is, think of it, you're going to do some basic thinking, okay, this is my idea, these are my hypotheses, generate an interview script for me. That's going to be reality, right? So whatever idea, you can start doing that. This is the conversation I had with a corporate leader today. It's like, Alex, can you do this for me? Well, not tomorrow, but these are the things that are going to happen. Surveys are going to be generated. And for testing new business models and value propositions, it's going to mean speeding up. The thing that I would really, be cautious about, the great ideas are never going to come from generative AI. That is human creativity. But is it going to be fewer people who can work with these tools? Because they enhance human creativity. They don't replace human creativity. So in innovation and entrepreneurship, generative AI is going to enhance human creativity if we use it well.
But, I agree that it will never replace human ingenuity and, feeling real pain points of specific problems. But bringing it back to the hypothesis testing side, will it have the ability to replace engagement on a sentiment level, right? And especially when we start looking at GPT-4 mixed with quantum, and you've got orders of magnitude of more data points, like, will we actually need to do customer discovery, or will we have, the collective, in one question responded back to us? I think that's where things get really interesting.
Yeah. And I love the way you just framed it, right? Because when you do an interview, you can feel, you can see, right? You can see the kind of the pupils dilate, right? Like now I'm onto something. That kind of human pattern recognition, because we're pretty complex machines that can do stuff. Like if you have a complete lack of empathy, maybe not, but like in people who are good at customer interviews, they can see things that a machine won't be able to do for a very long time.
Right.
But I'd not say never. So you know that today in insurance, there, you can have insurance applications online, and it's AI, measuring different data points, and based on your facial kind of mimicking, they can detect if you're lying or not for insurances. So I'd be super careful with, maybe actually what I just said was wrong, because a system can maybe better analyze. So I'm just actually, I took my hypothesis from the beginning. I'm throwing it over the thing. No. Interviews are going to be better done with the support of computer systems, but they won't replace them for a long time.
I forgot who it was. It was about, close to a decade. I think it was Mark Cuban may have said that we're moving into an era where the philosophers and the behavioral psychologists are the ones that are going to rule the world. It's the ones that can understand human behavior and interact with the technology. But that's the missing element that is hard to replicate, right?
It would be nice if it's, the positive side, the light that's going to rule, but we also know that these tools are going to be used by people who will abuse them. So we can only hope that we're going to be able to put a regulation in place to manage this. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that's going to happen before, countries and legislations are even going to understand. So it's a bit of a scary period. We've seen, in social, what self-regulation of companies actually means. And it rarely works, right? So governments do have a role. It's not about red tape, but it's about kind of, setting the framing for the playing field, so we stay, more on the positive side.
Wow, that is like the epitome of that E.O. Wilson quote, right? Where we're primitive beings with medieval institutions and godlike technology.
That is scary. That is scary, right? That is scary, and that's ahead of us, right? It's not far away.
Nice. So, you have been talking about, and you've contributed to this discourse about the business model canvas now. Gosh, it seems like yesterday, but it's already been 13, 14 years. A lot has changed in the, environment, the entrepreneurial world, and the way we do business and the technology around it. What do you think has kind of changed? Has anything changed your opinions, or is there any new learnings through the kind of evolution over these 13 years that you look back and say, okay, maybe some things, I need to look at things differently?
Oh, every day, right? So like if I'd stop, questioning myself, then I'd gotta, be a bit careful and maybe go see some people. But so all of the books when we write another book, first question is, does the world need another book? And, you got to be very careful to say yes to this, because there are a lot of books out there, and a lot of business books are written every year. So it's always informed by what we see. So when we expand, like some people say, oh, Alex, I know your book. Well, we wrote a couple, and that's okay. But Business Model Canvas is one tool, and it does one job. It shapes your, it allows you to capture this idea of a business and put it in a business model canvas. Well, guess what? We needed another tool for how products and services create value. That's the value proposition canvas. Does one replace the other? No, it's two tools. Then, of course, that whole thing merged with customer development and lean startup. So it's, there's so many things you need to get right when you're exploring a business idea as an entrepreneur or as an innovator. We figure out one solution. Well, how can we make this better? So until we can say, this is it, we've done it, it's now like accounting, like everything's clear, still a little bit of way to go. But I do think the evolution over the last 2 decades of this has been phenomenal. And I do believe people, who today say, well, I figured it out, and they're talking about stuff that was good 3 years ago. This field is still moving very fast. Again, one thing is people say, yeah, we do testing. Like, okay, then I ask, well, okay, how do you do it? Oh, we do MVP. Okay, well, great. That's very basic, right? So are you able, this is the question I ask, corporate innovators now, are you able to measure risk and uncertainty and make evidence-based investment in your portfolio in a very structured way? And most of them, they say, yeah, we ask for 100 interviews to get to the next phase. And that's like Stone Age, right? So today, with the different types of evidence, we know how to quantify risk, and we know how to compare that, to the kind of metrics we have in execution. If we're not working towards that profession, we can't be taken seriously. As, I'd say, as people who, teach entrepreneurship and innovation, we need to move towards that profession. And it's not today yet accepted as a profession, so there's still a bit of way to go. But the methods are getting very professional, right? So what worked 3 years ago, 5 years ago, what was state of the art, today is the Stone Age. So this is changing still all the time. What we're trying to do with computer systems is like, we're figuring out stuff by doing it in our own company. We're learning every day. So, and we talked about, ChatGPT, how we can use that. This is going to change a lot more. So it's not finished until it's finished. A lot of things changed. I don't think a lot of things that we figured out, I'm talking about, Eric Ries, Steve Blank, Yves Pinier, myself, everybody in this community. I don't think we got a lot of things wrong. I just think there's more things to add. It's just like, as a surgeon, you don't operate with a Swiss Army knife. I'd be scared if my surgeon shows up with a Swiss Army knife. Like that was 10 years ago. Today, we need, entrepreneurship and innovation scalpels, and you have the whole kind of operating toolbox to do that. This is where we're moving towards today. So I don't think we got a lot of it wrong. I think, we now know that it's a lot of different tools and methods together that turn this into a profession.
I have to ask you about this. This is my nerdy futurist self, so forgive me. But as somebody that, builds tools and methods and what you've created is pretty astounding. And hearing that, the future is bringing in more tools and methods. I was working out today listening to Dr. Peter Attia, and he was talking about the evolution of health and fitness and how we have different tools and protocols, right? And they got more and more sophisticated. And where does this culminate? And we're now getting to health and fitness mimetics, literally the exercise pill, where you take the pill and essentially it will make you fit. We're not there yet, but we're moving in that direction.
I'll take that pill. I need that pill.
Damn right. But as we talk about, all of these amazing innovations and technologies coming in, like, do you see a kind of point of unity where all of these tools and methods can come together, and there is the one-stop shop? Like, here's the problem I want to solve. I'm going to, collectively reach out to the world and have everything kind of harmonized and integrated for me.
It's the singularity of tools.
The singularity, that's the word I was thinking of. That's right, yeah.
So at the end of the day, best tools are going to be the tools that people use, right? So, and I think my philosophy around business tools, and I'm talking paper-based tools like the business model canvas or instantiations of those paper-based or concepts with computer-aided design and systems like we're trying to build them at Strategyzer, you have UX and UI, right? So when we designed the business model canvas ages ago, same for value proposition canvas, we focused on the user interface. How did we lay that out? It's not about filling in the boxes because they're related, right? It's the 9 elements together that make a business model. And then the user experience. Can people use this fast without explanations? So that's the first thing. I think we have too many tools out there. Now there's, a canvas for everything. And generally, this is the thing that I see sometimes when people are not very sophisticated in tool design. They just put, business tool design, they put a couple of boxes and arrows together and they call it a tool. And you have 25 boxes that answer every single thing in the universe. It's unusable, right? And this is not to make fun of people, but nobody's going to be able to use that. So what we need to realize is the simplicity of specific tools doing one thing and then combining them with other tools doing one thing is going to be extremely powerful. And at the end of the day, users are going to vote. It's users who are going to use that. Now, we tried to. When there's no tool, we make one. When there's one that exists, we didn't reinvent jobs to be done. We use it, right? It works. We didn't reinvent customer development. It works. We built on top of that. There was no metric system. So we did that. Nobody has come up with a testing library. So we wrote business, testing business ideas. So I think that's what we're going to see. And that's what I envision is that, people will try to make the best tools and people will vote for the best tools and then we bring them together. I think that's the kind of thing, that we need to see. And maybe the collaboration between the thinkers is not always good because sometimes people see each other as competitors. Well, guess what? The users are going to vote. It's just like in any other domain, the users are going to decide.
Awesome. Well, Alex, I think that ties a bow on our conversation about the future, although I could do this for hours picking your brain on where do we go from here. But we like to wrap up our episodes with kind of 3 quick rapid fire questions. 1 is hard, 2 are easy, but less enjoyable. So I'm going to do that real quick. The first one, maybe the slightly harder one is, you've been in this world for a long time. You've seen a lot of founders. You've worked with a lot of corporates and other institutions, tested your hypotheses and your tools and your models. What advice would you give your younger self that you have learned on this journey so far?
I'd say, well, first, very simple, say hire a breakthrough coach. So what changed my life, and I did that at 40, was hiring a breakthrough coach. In my case, it's Shani Ospina. She changed, the way I look at myself, how I improve every day, how I manage business, and how I am as a person. I should have done that way earlier because I would have become a better human earlier. That's never too late, but I did that also with my kids. We did some entrepreneurship projects. We have a Biz for Kids comic that we put out, but I also worked with my coach, and gave my kids access to that. So I think coaching is completely underestimated. We think of coaching as, oh, you're broken, you need coaching. No, you want to get better? Well, guess what? Have you ever seen a sports star not having a coach?
Right.
Like, really? So we need to see that as something that enhances you. That's my number one that I would put on top. I should have made that hire faster. The one I did faster is the PA, personal assistant. I think people see it as a cost. It actually liberates your time. So I'd see that as well. Like, founders have no money for nothing, but you know what? A personal assistant is actually an investment that you should make fast because your time is valuable. If you're booking your trips, well, okay, if you can't afford that, fine. But the moment you can afford that, don't book those trips.
Right. Great point. Time and perspective, they're things that money can't buy, worth their weight in gold. All right. Two perhaps more banal questions, but to give a little bit of insight into Alex, the human. What, we can learn so much from what people read. I have no doubt in my mind you are an active and voracious reader as well as author. What book is on your bedside table? What would you like to recommend right now?
So I just gave a colleague of mine a book called The Courage to be Disliked. And the title, is interesting, right? But it's around, focus on yourself and let others focus on their decisions, right? Sometimes we want people to behave in a certain way. I want my kids to behave in a certain way. No, let them make their mistakes and let them make their decisions, right? It's, so The Courage to be Disliked is one I put really, really at the top. It's a pretty phenomenal book.
Amazing. And what's cycling on your playlist? That can be music, that can be podcasts. When you're tuning out the world and listening, what are you listening to?
So I listen to a lot of books on Audible when I do ski touring or when I go running. But there are 2 things, like one podcast that I listen to almost religiously is 20-Minute VC by Harry Stebbings. Mm-hmm. I think every entrepreneur and VC should listen to that. It's just really, it's very dense. it's value per minute, right? I like that because I don't have a lot of time. So that one is really phenomenal. And then I just listen to a lot of hip hop actually. And my children obviously keep me up to date. Otherwise, I just listen to old school, Tupac and so. But my kids keep my playlist and hip hop up to date. So that's the second kind of thing that I'm listening to.
Awesome. Alex, thank you so much for joining us. I felt like we could do this for another hour. So much great nuggets of wisdom, and really great to finally meet you and hear it from the man himself. We really appreciate having you.
Well, thanks for having me. Awesome conversation. And yeah, we should do more of these, right?
Look forward to it. Awesome. Thank you so much. Have a good one.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Take care.
Well, folks, that was Alex Osterwalder, entrepreneur, founder of Strategyzer, visiting professor at IMD Business School, author, public speaker, and father of the famed business model canvas. Stay tuned for our next episode, going live every other Wednesday. And if you enjoyed this one, be sure to like, subscribe, share, and comment on your favorite podcast streaming service. Bis nächstes Mal.